Today we'll be talking about adding and subtracting polynomials. The first thing to remember is that when you add or subtract polynomials, the way that you do it is by doing what we call combining like terms. So you must combine like terms. So like terms, you might have heard this before. The key thing to know is that two things are like terms if they have the same variable. For example, I'll give you a few examples. For example, 2x and 9x are like terms. So are 3y and 2y. Also, if you have something like negative 5x to the fourth and 8x to the fourth, those are like terms because not only do they have the same variable, but they have the variable going to the same power. Also, if you have two constants, which are numbers, something like 5 and negative 1, those would be considered like terms. So I'm also going to give you a few things that are not examples of like terms, which means that you cannot put them together, you cannot combine them. For example, you can't put together 3x to the third and 3x to the fourth. Those are not like terms. Even though they have the same coefficient of 3, the x has a different exponent, so you can't do anything with them. Also, if you have something like 3y and 2x, they don't have the same variable, so they are definitely not like terms. Same thing if you have something with a variable and something that's a constant, like 3y and 8, that can't be combined. Also, if you have like 3x to the negative 3 and 3x to the third, you can't combine those at all. So you'll find that these things are not examples. You actually can do stuff to them when you're multiplying, which we're going to talk about later on. But when you're adding or subtracting, you cannot put any of these things on the right-hand side together. You're not allowed to do that. But anything on the left-hand side, the examples I have in blue, those you are allowed to combine. You can put those together. Our first example, I'm going to ask you to find the sum or difference. In this case, it's a sum because I have an addition sign in between them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to combine like terms. And the first thing I'm actually going to do is rewrite this without the parentheses. Since there is nothing outside of these parentheses other than a plus sign, on the right-hand side, there's nothing outside of those parentheses other than plus, we actually don't have to do anything. We can just rewrite this entire thing without the parentheses. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to underline things that are like terms. So the first thing I have that's like terms is this 4x to the third and this x to the third. So remember, the x to the third is positive because there's a plus in front of it. So I'm going to add those together. If you want, you can put a 1x. That's going to give me 5x to the third. By the way, you'll notice as I do these, I write them in order from the highest exponent to the lowest exponent. It's important that you do this. We call that standard form, so please make sure you're doing that. Next thing I'm going to do is my x squareds. So I'm going to underline both of those in pink. This one's a 1x squared. Then the one that has the negative 3x squared has a coefficient of negative 3. So what's going to happen is I'm going to do 1 minus 3. When I put those together, I do 1 minus 3 is negative 2. And I keep the variables the same. It's still x to the second. One thing you should notice is that when I put together the x to the third, I didn't change my variable. It was still x to the third in the end. So please make sure that when you're adding or subtracting, you keep your variable the same. The next thing I have is 7x. There's no term that has an x with it other than that, so I'm just going to rewrite that as 7x. I can't do anything with that. And the last term I have is this minus 5, so I'm just going to rewrite that as minus 5. I cannot do anything with that. And actually, this is all I'm going to do for this problem, so you don't do anything after that. So that's my answer. For my next example, if you're feeling pretty comfortable with this one, you can feel free to try this one on your own. And actually, I'll put down the next two examples. You can feel free to try both of them on your own. Or if you're still like not 100% sure, you can wait for me to do it and just watch me do it. So for number 2, I'm going to start by putting together my x squared. So I have 1x squared and 1x squared. That gives me 2x squared. You'll notice that I didn't even worry about taking out my parentheses. It doesn't really matter. You can take them out if you want to, or you can just keep them as is. Next thing I'm going to do is put together my x's. So I have a 1x here and I have a minus 1x here. That actually gives me 0x. You don't even need to write the 0x. To be honest, if you want to skip that step, that's fine with me. I don't really care. And just get straight to the answer from here. I also have an 8 and minus 1. That gives me minus 7. So my final answer is just going to be 2x squared minus 7. And as I said before, if you want to skip the step where you write the 0x, that's fine. I don't mind. So next problem is number 3. I am going to start in order with my highest exponent, which is 5x to the third. I don't do anything with that because there's no other term that has an x to the third. Next thing is my negative 1x to the second and my 3x to the second. That gives me plus 2x to the second. Next thing I'm going to do is my 8x and my 2x. That gives me plus 10x. The last thing I have left over is my minus 1. So I'm just going to write that as minus 1. You'll notice as I'm doing these problems, I underline things when I use them. The reason I'm doing that is because in general, people tend to lose things along the way as they're doing these. I like to underline things as I use them so I don't forget about them. Then I can look back and make sure everything is underlined before I move on to the next problem. So this is just my answer here. I don't have to do anything more. The next problem involves subtraction. So in all honesty, subtraction we do the exact same way that we do addition, with the exception of one step that we do in the very beginning. So my first thing in parentheses, the 4y squared minus 3, I'm not going to do anything with that because there's no number in front of it that I need to distribute. So I'm just going to rewrite that as 4y squared minus 3. However, the next part, I have these parentheses, but I have a negative in front of the parentheses. When you have a negative in front of the parentheses, you must distribute it to everything that is inside of those parentheses. So what's going to happen is my second part of this problem now becomes plus 2y to the second minus 5y plus 1. Please do not forget that step. From there, the problem is just like the other ones that we've been doing. So you're just going to follow the directions that you did for addition. I'm going to put together my 4y squared and my 2y squared. When I add those together, I get 6y squared. I am going to just write down my 5y. There's nothing that goes with it, so I'm going to write down minus 5y. The last thing is my negative 3 and my 1. That gives me minus 2. And this is my answer. So I'm going to do one more problem. Feel free to do this one on your own if you feel comfortable with it. Otherwise, go ahead and you can just wait for me to do it. So for this problem, same as the previous one, I'm going to start by distributing my negative to everything in these parentheses. I end up getting negative x to the third minus x plus 1 minus 2x to the third minus x plus 3. From there, I'm going to put together my like terms. So I have this minus 1x to the third and this minus 2x to the third. So negative 1 plus negative 2 gives me negative 3. I end up getting negative 3x to the third. Same thing with my minus x, my minus x. It's minus 1x minus 1x. That gives me minus 2x. My last step of this problem is to put together my constants, which is 1 plus 3. So this is my final answer.